Come closer for a moment, and settle your mind, as if you were easing into a soft chair by an old window, where the night air drifts in just enough to remind you the world is bigger than you remembered. Tonight, I want to tell you something small and immense all at once. Something about the quietest thing that ever happened in a universe that can't help but roar when it wants to hide its gentlest secrets. It's only fair I tell you now. This story won't rush to reveal itself because it isn't made of noise or urgency but of things that linger on the edge of knowing, like a faint star you glimpse best when you don't look right at it. If you find your mind wandering, drifting the way light drifts through old glass, that's fine too. This story will be here, whispering patiently, like a pulse that doesn't care if you catch every beat. If you like where we're headed, stay a while. Maybe let this unfold while you lie in bed, or sit by your window, or close your eyes in a quiet corner of your day. And now, if you're ready, come with me to the edge of an old hill where the stars have gathered to share a secret they only speak in the language of collapsed suns and spinning ghosts. I came here when the city's breath felt too heavy, when my days stacked up like unopened letters, and I needed to feel small in a way that doesn't shrink you but makes space inside your chest where forgotten questions can rise again. The old observatory sits on the hilltop like a half-remembered promise from someone who always meant to keep it but got distracted by life's louder things. Its stone walls sigh at night, and the floorboards remember every footstep that ever creaked across them. I let myself in with a key someone trusted me with long ago, when I still thought the sky was just a lid over my world instead of a door to countless worlds stacked inside one another like nesting dreams. The dome was already cracked open when I arrived tonight, a slit of black sky trembling with pinpricks of white that feel older than thought. I carried my thermos and my notebook and the ache in my chest that never leaves when I'm too long in places where the stars are only rumors. Inside, the telescope waited like an old friend who knows when not to ask questions. I unlatched the rusted panel and swung it gently toward the corner of sky where something had gone dark weeks ago. A supernova, they said on the news, a star that burned all its story in one final flourish and then slipped away, leaving a cold seed in its place. They called it a neutron star on the broadcast, and people nodded like they understood but didn't really. A star so dense you could hold a mountain on your palm if you could hold it at all. A place where matter folds in on itself until it forgets how to be anything but gravity's secret. I like to think about that sometimes, how the loudest death leaves behind the quietest core, spinning and humming and sending out pulses so steady they shame every clock humans ever made. Tonight, I find it again, not with grand equipment or bank-funded research but with my old scope, my warm breath in the cold dome air, and the hush that settles when your heartbeat slows enough to listen past your own thoughts. Through the eyepiece I find its pulse. Not a flicker like a candle but a rhythm, a patient strobe that says I am here, I am here, I am here long after everything else has moved on. I write the numbers in my notebook though I know they won't matter tomorrow. This is more about the ritual than the result. A way to remember that for every skyscraper we build and argument we win and small sorrow we bury under busyness, the sky remains a vast library of unfinished pages. Sometimes when I sit here alone, I wonder if these pulses are memories the universe keeps repeating because it doesn't know how to forget. Maybe every neutron star is a kind of confession, a final thought pressed so tightly it becomes a jewel of gravity, too heavy to lose. The pulse reaches me now in tiny packets of energy that once belonged to a giant blazing sun, a giant that cracked open so fiercely its heart collapsed inward forever. And here I am, a small creature on a small blue dot, scribbling notes in the cold while the pulse hums on, uncaring whether I'm here to notice or not. Outside the dome the night leans in closer. Wind strokes the grass on the hilltop. An owl lifts from a branch and coasts silent against the dark. Somewhere down below, the town sleeps, lights out in windows where people curl around their own quiet heartbreaks and half-formed dreams. They don't know there's a star's ghost whispering above them, or maybe they do in some secret part of themselves that still wakes at 3 a.m. and stares at the ceiling wondering what all this is for. I think the neutron star would tell them if it could speak in words instead of pulses. It might say everything ends, but nothing is lost. Or maybe it would just keep spinning, content with the language it knows. I pour coffee that's already lukewarm and drink it anyway because the warmth feels good against my hands, a reminder that I am still soft and alive while so much out there is hard and indifferent. I press my palm flat on the telescope's base and imagine the connection between here and there, a shaft of thought reaching across light years to tap on a door that never truly closes. Some nights I swear I feel it tap back. Not an answer, but a permission to keep asking, to keep wondering, to keep showing up even when the world says sleep, forget, move on. When I close my eyes, I see not darkness, but a swirl of old light, echoes of the big things we rarely stop to hold. The birth of a neutron star is not really a birth at all, but a transformation, a reminder that the universe does not erase so much as compress, fold, and whisper its secrets through the cold corridors of space. I think about how one day I'll leave this hilltop for the last time, and the dome will rust shut, and the sky will keep pulsing its ghost song to no one. Or maybe someone else will find the key, stand where I stand, and listen the way I listen tonight, breath slow, heart soft, eyes open to the hush that follows when a star remembers how to be quiet. So I write it down while the night still holds me here. My pen scratches gently over the paper, my coffee cools beside me, the wind nudges the dome to remind me nothing is ever truly still. I write so that when I close my notebook and slip back into the human hum of daytime things, this hush will remain tucked inside the pages, a small gravity I can carry in my pocket. A reminder that somewhere, far from city lights and mortal worries, something impossibly dense spins on, saying in its silent way, even endings can leave behind the quietest wonder. And I listen, and I write, and for tonight that is enough. Ask ChatGPT. When I come back the next night the air is colder, and the dome creaks more than I remember, as if the old metal ribs are sighing with the chill. I close the heavy door behind me, and stand for a moment letting my eyes adjust to the half-dark where shadows lean against shelves stacked with forgotten folders and jars of bolts that haven't turned a screw in decades. I can feel the old building settling around me like a blanket woven from wood and dust and distant echoes of lectures given to empty rows. Outside the wind combs through the hill grass with a hush that sounds almost like a question waiting for an answer it knows may never come. I set my thermos down on the same scarred table and slide my notebook beside it, careful not to wake the dust that has chosen this place to rest. The telescope's spine hums faintly, a vibration so slight I feel it in my fingertips before I hear it with my ears, and it calms me like a heartbeat steady and sure beneath ribs of glass and iron. I lean in and adjust the angle, minutely watching the motors respond with that patient mechanical whir that never hurries, never demands, just moves because I asked it to. When I look through the eyepiece, the familiar patch of sky appears, pinholes of ancient light scattered in patterns my brain insists on recognizing even when I try not to. I know their names, the catalog numbers, the distances so vast they slip out of language and into pure feeling. Tonight, I find the neutron star again, the same pulse repeating so calmly it feels like it belongs to some secret order older than thought. I whisper the new measurements to myself as I write them down, though no one else is here to hear my voice echo back. There is something about speaking to an empty room that makes it feel less empty, like calling out into the dark to prove you're still here, breathing, thinking, asking questions no one will answer directly. I wonder if the first person to point a telescope at the stars felt this same hush pressing against their skin, a hush that doesn't want silence exactly, but wants you to notice how the silence holds everything together. I think about how this neutron star used to be something vast, and while the sun burning so hot its light could blind whole planets, and now here it is reduced, compressed, a single beat of memory spinning out its pulse to any stray eye willing to look up. Some part of me wants to believe that in those pulses there's a message, not words, but intention, a code pressed so tight into the spin that if I could just listen well enough, long enough, I'd catch a whisper meant only for the few of us awake at this hour, with our notebooks and our thermoses and our heads full of quiet questions. My coffee is warmer tonight because I remember to bring an old flask that seals better than the battered thermos I've used too many winters in a row. I sip it slowly, letting the steam wrap around my nose while my eyes blur and refocus on the flicker in the eyepiece. I'm not sure why it feels comforting to sit here, half-frozen, hands curled around warm metal and paper, when I could be at home under a blanket with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of a street lamp out the window. Maybe it's because here I feel like I'm brushing up against the edge of something that doesn't care if I understand it, but invites me anyway to stand in its shadow and wonder. There's a mouse that lives somewhere in the observatory walls. I hear it sometimes, a faint scurry behind the old radiators, or the sudden sound of tiny feet skittering across the floor when I shift too suddenly in my chair. I leave it crumbs, sometimes a bit of stale bread or the corner of a cookie broken off and placed near a crack in the baseboard. I like to think the mouse and I are sharing this vigil, though of course it doesn't care about the stars, it cares about warmth and crumbs and the quiet promise that no one here will try to catch it. It's a small thing, but it feels right that in this place built to stretch human sight across millions of miles, a creature no bigger than my palm finds shelter and comfort among forgotten books and the ghostlight of collapsed suns. I wonder if the mouse ever pauses near my boot to feel the vibrations of the telescope the way I do, if its tiny heart registers the same hum and files it away as a sign that this place is safe, alive, gently vibrating with mysteries it has no name for. I glance at the clock, though it doesn't matter, the hour doesn't press here the way it does in the daylight, when meetings crowd each other and emails pile up and voices chatter through walls asking for things I half promised to deliver. Here there's only the pulse and the cold and the slow drift of my breath visible when I exhale too close to the dome's drafty edges. I think about time a lot out here, how the neutron stars spin is a kind of clock, but not the kind you can wind or hang on a kitchen wall. Its rotation slows fractionally over centuries, losing energy in pulses that slip through space like breadcrumbs for anyone curious enough to follow. One day even that pulse will stop its spin, giving up its last secret to the dark, but that day won't come soon, not by any measure we keep on Earth. That comforts me in a way I can't quite explain, a steadiness out there that ignores our deadlines, our endings, our flares of panic about being late for things that probably don't matter. I close my notebook for a moment and press my palm against the cover, feeling the soft give of paper beneath my hand, the warmth that my body leaves behind. I wonder what someone would think if they found these pages 100 years from now, yellowed edges filled with half-finished equations and stray thoughts about mice and stars, and the feel of cold air on the back of my neck. Maybe they'd smile at how small my questions seem, or maybe they'd feel that same quiet rush in their chest that makes them step outside on a clear night and look up just to feel tiny in the best possible way. I like imagining that chain unbroken, one curious mind handing the key to another, saying, "Sit here, if you like, listen, if you want, there's no hurry." Outside, the wind pushes harder, rattling the dome's old frame, a reminder that no matter how many calculations I make, the world beyond these walls is always moving, shifting, rewriting its own equations in the language of weather and time and decay. I take another sip of coffee, cold again, but still better than nothing, and rest my head for a moment against the scope's cool barrel. I close my eyes and picture the neutron star not as a pinpoint on a chart, but as a living memory, a spinning monument to all the things we can't hold, but can't bear to lose. It hums on, indifferent to my questions, patient in a way I wish I could be patient, an old whisper that says everything you worry about is so small compared to this, and still it matters, because you're here to notice. When I open my eyes again, the pulse is still there, a tiny heartbeat in a sea too vast to name. I jot down the final notes for the night, words that don't change the star but change me each time I write them. Tonight the hill feels steeper than usual as I climb it, with my breath folding in and out of the cold air that tastes like old stone and wet grass. My boots scuff the gravel path in a steady rhythm that matches the faint hum in my chest, a pulse that echoes the spin waiting for me at the top. The observatory appears slowly, its dark shape rising out of the night like a ship drifting through a black sea. There's a comfort in how unchanged it always is, a comfort in the way the door sticks just enough that I have to lean my shoulder into it to make it yield, with a sigh of hinges that remember better days. Inside, I pause just past the threshold, letting the warmth from my thermos seep through my glove while my eyes adjust to the gentle hush that has settled like a soft dust over everything. The telescope stands where I left it, slightly off-center, pointed toward the same patch of sky that has become almost familiar enough to feel like an address I could write on an envelope and send a letter to, if only I knew how to stamp a thought. I flip open my notebook and trace the last line I wrote yesterday, running my finger over the dented paper, as if the indentation might remind me what I was feeling when I press pen to page. There's a kind of relief in picking up the thread right where I left it, the same pulse, the same flicker, the same question that has no deadline, no angry alarm waiting to buzz if I drift too long between lines. I settle onto the old stool that wobbles just enough to remind me how long it has been waiting here, and I lean into the eyepiece the way I might lean into a familiar shoulder if there were anyone here but me. The cold metal kisses the ridge of my brow, and for a moment all I see is the faint green smear of my own eyelid closing against the light inside the dome. Then the stars sharpen into being that ancient pattern of flickers and hushes so far away I almost laugh at myself for pretending my notes matter at all to what's out there. But I write them anyway, small numbers scrawled beside larger thoughts, tiny bookmarks for bigger questions that crowd my head when I lie awake at home, staring at my ceiling, wondering how many other people are out there, eyes open wide with the same soft ache for something that doesn't fit inside a calendar or a paycheck or a list of errands pinned to the fridge. The pulse tonight is steady, the same heartbeat spaced out by the universe's patient hand, a metronome that does not care if I am here to catch its rhythm. I find comfort in that indifference, the way some people find comfort in the regular drip of a faucet, or the way rain insists on falling even when no one is watching it paint tiny rivers down a window. Somewhere behind me a draft nudges the edge of a stack of old journals, and they slide an inch before stopping, as if reminding me they're here, filled with other nights, other pulses, other thoughts that once felt urgent, but now just wait quietly for someone to turn their pages again. Sometimes I think about all the people who must have sat here before me, the professors, the students, the restless insomniacs, who traded warm beds for this cold circle of wood and metal and sky. I wonder what they asked when they stared through the glass, if they felt their questions answered or only multiplied, if they ever found themselves talking softly to the dark, hoping it might whisper back through the spin of a collapsed star. I shift slightly, the stool squeaks under my weight, and I imagine the mouse in the walls pausing its tiny errands to listen for a heartbeat other than its own. Maybe it hears the pulse to a vibration traveling down steel and stone into the cracks and hollows where it sleeps curled tight against the chill. I like that idea, the thought that this old dome is a house for so many forms of listening, not all of them human. Outside, the wind has changed again, bringing a sharper edge that makes the rafters groan, like old bones settling in for the long night. I wrap my scarf tighter around my neck and lean forward, bracing my elbows on the table, so the telescope's cold barrel presses into my cheekbone. Through the eyepiece, the neutron star's pulse feels closer than the distance should allow, as if it's blinking just behind my eyelids rather than thousands of light years away. I let my mind drift there for a moment, imagining what it must be like to exist in that state, collapsed beyond recognition, but refusing to vanish entirely. A sun's corpse still singing its tiny song long after its voice should have gone quiet. It's a strange mercy, I think, the way the universe keeps some things alive through sheer stubborn spin, a defiance of stillness that I find oddly hopeful when my own life feels too fragile, too easily undone by chance or loss, or the slow wearing down of days that all look the same if you squint too long at them. My pencil scratches another line into the notebook, the graphite smudging slightly under my palm as I drag it down the page. I wonder sometimes what I'm really writing here, whether the numbers matter, or if the real work is the act of paying attention, of refusing to let this tiny pulse disappear into the static hum of all the other things demanding my time. Maybe it's not about the science, not really. Maybe it's about giving shape to a feeling that would otherwise float untethered through my mind, too soft to name, but too sharp to ignore. A thought drifts up as I sip what's left of my coffee, that the neutron star doesn't care what I call it, that it will keep spinning even if my notebook falls into the sea or burns to ash in a careless fire. And yet here I am, marking its heartbeat like a tally of days, like a prayer offered not to be answered, but to remind myself I am still here listening. The mouse appears at the far edge of the floor bowl tonight. It noses the crumb I left yesterday, carrying it off in tiny shuffles that make no sound I can hear over the hush of my own breath. I wonder what it thinks of me, this strange guest who sits so still for hours smelling of old wool and ink. Maybe it doesn't think at all. Maybe it just accepts my presence the way I accept the pulse, a fact that needs no reason. The dome above me shifts slightly, metal groaning, as the wind tests. It seems I can feel the draft on my fingertips, where they rest against the cold surface of the scope. I glance at the clock again, even though time doesn't belong here. Not really. This place runs on a different scale, one measured in spins and pulses in light that left its source before my species even learned to carve its first questions into stone. My eyes sting a little from the strain, so I blink slowly, and when they open, the pulse is still there, as loyal as breath. I let out a sound that might be a laugh or might be a sigh, then press my pencil to the page once more, drawing a small circle around the latest number, as if that could. When the dawn finally comes, I am not there to see it, because I have fallen asleep at my small kitchen table with my jacket still on, and my notebook half open beside a mug stained with cold coffee rings. The sun slips through the blinds with a pale shyness, as if it knows it does not belong to this story, and yet insists on showing up anyway to remind me that time on Earth does not bend to the gentle spin of distant stars. I wake with a stiff neck and a strange sense of having carried some piece of the night into my dreams, though the details fade the moment my eyes find the ceiling, and the hush of the hilltop is replaced by the hum of my refrigerator and the faint tapping of pipes warming up for the day. I run my hands over my face, trying to press the sleep lines back into my skin, while my thoughts wander stubbornly back to the dome, to the pulse waiting like a steady friend that does not mind how often I leave and return. I boil water for tea, this time something softer than coffee, something that reminds me there is a warmth here too, not just the cold breath of the observatory. The steam curls around my hands as I cup the mug and lean against the counter listening to the world outside waking up slowly, cars passing in soft growls, birds testing the air with sleepy songs, neighbors shifting behind thin walls, carrying out rituals of their own, small, unremarkable miracles of routine that keep the restlessness at bay. I think about not going tonight, about staying here instead, letting the night pass without me perched at that old telescope. But even as the thought drifts through my mind, it falls apart like a paper boat in rain. I know I will go, because some part of me is already halfway up the hill, already pushing the door open with my shoulder, already hearing the mouse rustle behind the walls, like a tiny echo of my own habits. The day drags itself along, pulling me with it, errand small talk messages that demand answers to questions that feel thinner and thinner the longer I keep this other pulse close to my ribs. Sometimes someone asks what I do out there alone in that forgotten dome, and I try to explain without really explaining, because how do you tell someone you are listening to a heartbeat that does not need you to listen? And yet, you go on listening because something in you needs it to keep spinning. They nod politely and make a joke about aliens or black holes swallowing me whole, but their eyes wander before my sentence finishes, and I do not blame them. Not everyone wants to stand in the cold and feel the vastness settle into their bones. Not everyone wants to be reminded that the universe does not know our names, and yet leaves us space to write them down anyway. When the sun drops and the shadows stretch themselves into shapes that reach for the edge of my street, I gather my notebook and my scarf and my thermos again, the same ritual repeated with the same care, as if packing for a small pilgrimage. The hill greets me like an old friend whose silence says more than words ever could. The wind tonight is sharp enough to slip through the gaps in my coat and nip at the skin behind my ears, but I welcome it because it keeps me awake, sharpens the line between here and there, the city lights behind me, the domes hush ahead. Inside the observatory, the air holds a different cold, a layered quiet that carries traces of every breath ever taken here, a soft accumulation of secrets and sighs and half-finished thoughts left behind like fingerprints on dusty glass. I set my things down gently, as if not to disturb the ghosts of the place, though I know they are not ghosts in any haunted sense, just memories of all the questions that have hovered here waiting for someone to carry them a little further. The telescope shifts under my touch, obedient old bones turning to the sky with a grace that feels almost alive. I press my eye to the glass, and there it is again, the pulse, my patient companion, blinking through the distance with a calm that makes my shoulders drop, the day's noise dissolving like sugar in warm water. I breathe in the cold of the dome and out into the eyepiece, fogging the edges for a second before the glass clears and the neutron star reappears undisturbed by my humanness. Tonight I trace its path a little longer than usual, noting tiny changes that may mean nothing but might one day mean everything to someone who finds these scribbles and understands them in ways I never could. The pencil glides across the paper in loops and lines that anchor me here to this There is a moment when the hill disappears behind me and the town swallows me up again, when I almost forget how thin the night felt up there, how close the stars leaned in, when I press my eye to the cold glass and let my thoughts drift so far they brushed against something I can never quite hold. Down here, under the streetlights, with the hum of wires and the soft groan of old plumbing somewhere behind the walls, it would be easy to believe the pulse has nothing to do with this life at all, that it lives in a separate world so distant it might as well be a myth. But the truth is, it follows me, slips into my pocket like a folded note I forgot I wrote to myself. It hums under my ribs when I stand too still in line at the corner shop or wait for the kettle to hiss its impatient steam into my kitchen air. I feel it even now as I settle into the small creak of my apartment, the radiator ticking in quiet argument with the cold seeping through thin windows, the refrigerator humming its old song of keeping things from spoiling too soon. The notebook lies open on my table where I left it, the pages warped slightly where steam from the mug drifted too close, the pencil resting in the groove of the spine, like it fell asleep in the middle of a thought. I stand over it for a while, tracing the lines with my fingertip, remembering how each mark came from a night that felt the same yet never quite was. I think about how the pulse I watch so carefully does not know me yet. I know it now, in a way that feels almost personal, a secret I carry through the noise of my days. Sometimes, I wonder if people would understand if they saw these pages, if they would see only numbers and half-formed notes, or if they would hear it too, the hush behind the marks, the gentle insistence that something so impossibly far away can still reach across the dark and touch a mind that never asked to be touched. The kettle clicks off, and I pour water over tea leaves, watching the steam rise and vanish as if proving some point about how quickly warmth slips away if you do not stand close enough to feel it. I cup my hands around the mug, letting the heat find the cold bones in my fingers, and I think about how easy it would be to stop climbing that hill, to stop pushing open that old door, to stop pretending that a pulse that old cares if I listen or not. But even as I think it, I know it is not true, that the thought of not going leaves a space too hollow to ignore. Outside the window the street is empty except for the hush of trees shifting their bare branches in a wind that still remembers the hill, and the way it bends the grass into ripples you can feel even when you stand too far away to see them. I wonder if the wind ever carries my questions back up there, if it brushes against the dome and slips through the thin cracks to whisper to the mouse in the walls that I am coming back, that I am not finished asking yet. I sip the tea, too hot on my tongue at first, but I hold it there, let the heat remind me that I am here, breathing, living, listening, even when the sky is hidden by roofs and cables, and the soft halo of city light that pretends to keep the dark away. I flip the notebook shut for now, but I know the pages inside are not quiet. They hum with a pulse waiting to be heard again. The next time I climb the hill, the next time I fold myself into that old stool and lean close enough to feel like I might fall through the glass and into the hush between the stars. Morning comes slow the next day, stretched out in muted colors that make the town look softer than it really is. I let the day carry me where it wants errands, conversations I nod through without really hearing the words, the hum of traffic that fills the spaces between one small obligation and the next. I catch my reflection in a shop window and almost laugh at how ordinary I look, a person carrying groceries, a person checking their phone, a person waiting at a red light, as if the same hands that hold the pulse on paper also hold a bag of apples and a crumpled receipt. It comforts me somehow, this double life, the way it folds the vast into the everyday, as if the hush at the edge of everything has agreed to slip into my pocket when I am not looking, to keep me company when the chatter of the world gets too close. By the time the sun dips again behind the narrow line of rooftops, I am already thinking about the door on the hill, how it sticks when the wind blows too hard, how the dome shivers when I first step inside, as if bracing itself for my small warmth. I boil more water, pack the same old thermos that leaks a little if I do not screw the lid just right. I slip the pencil back into my coat pocket and fold the notebook into the crook of my arm, like it might fly away if I do not hold it tight enough. The walk up the hill feels different tonight, heavier, maybe because the wind has found its sharp edge again, or maybe because I feel the weight of all the nights behind me layering themselves into a ritual that keeps asking me to remember why I started in the first place. I pause halfway up, catching my breath, listening to the way the world goes quiet out here, the last echoes of the town falling away behind me, leaving only the slow rush of air through grass and the soft crunch of my boots on the gravel path. I stand there for a minute or two, eyes lifted to the dome silhouetted against a sky that seems whiter than usual, a sweep of velvet brushed clean by winter's insistence on honesty. When I finally reach the door, I lean my shoulder against it the way I always do, feel the hinges sigh in recognition, and step inside, where the cold greets me like an old friend who never says much but always makes space for my noise. The telescope waits patient, unblinking, the barrel angled just so as if it remembers the exact patch of sky we left off at. I set my things down gently, careful not to disturb the mouse. If it is near, though tonight I do not see it, maybe tucked deeper into its nest of scraps, and lent somewhere behind the cracked panel at the base of the wall. I unfold the notebook, run my thumb over the last line, feel the slight grit of graphite against skin as if reminding myself this is real, this is mine, this is now. I lean into the eyepiece, find the flicker, the pulse, the impossibly distant heartbeat pressing itself across time and space to find my again. For a moment, I think of all the ways light can bend around the edges of gravity, all the ways the spin pulls at space, until even time has to lean into its curve. I wonder what it would feel like to stand on the edge of that spin, to press a hand to that dense surface, and feel the hum that refuses to fade even when the roar of the original star has long gone quiet. Sometimes during the day, when I am not up on the hill, I catch myself glancing at the sky, as if I could see straight through the blue and the sun and the drifting clouds to where the Neutron star spins on, with its patient certainty far beyond the chatter of daylight. It feels almost foolish how my mind slips back to it in the middle of so many ordinary moments, waiting for the kettle to boil, or the bus to arrive, or my name to be called in a line that snakes around a dull room filled with sighs and shifting feet. The pulse lives in the back of my thoughts, like a quiet promise that the noise of now is not the only noise there is. In these moments, I find myself gripping my pen tighter or tracing invisible circles on the cover of my closed notebook, as if the contact might bridge the impossible distance between this place of lukewarm errands and that cold dome where the hush feels like a second heartbeat tucked just beneath my own. Sometimes a voice on the radio talks about weather or traffic or the slow drip of news, and I wonder what the anchor would say if they knew that somewhere out there a collapsed sun is whispering its pulse through the black every second of every day, while we argue over breakfast and bank accounts, and whose turn it is to stand in line. I think maybe they would pause, maybe their voice would soften just for a breath before they slipped back into the script, but I like to believe some part of them would carry that hush home and think of it when they turn off their bedside lamp. I find myself jotting small thoughts in the margins of shopping lists, reminders to look up, reminders that the spin is still there, reminders that not all clocks tick the way we think they do. I see my handwriting trailing off at the edges of receipts and scraps of napkin, reminders that feel half dreamt, half deliberate. On these scraps I draw circles that close and open again, spirals that mimic the soft drag of a star's breath after it has spent all its fire, and agreed to stay behind in a smaller, denser form than any human worry could bend or burn away. I fold these scraps into pockets, into books, into drawers I will open weeks later, and smile at the way my own mind keeps leaving breadcrumbs to lead me back to that dome, that hill, that pulse. And when the sun dips and the sky bruises itself purple and gray, I feel the same gentle tug behind my ribs that tells me it is time to climb again. The hill tonight feels softer than usual, the wind less sharp, the gravel path less inclined to slip under my boots. I pause halfway up and look behind me at the town, the way the streetlights pool their dull yellow glow around quiet corners and parked cars. From here the town looks harmless, almost tender in its hush, like a creature curled into sleep, while I walk my slow spiral up to a place where sleep feels too small to hold what I am after. The door sticks again when I push, but the hinges give with the same low sigh, and I step inside, greeted by the usual hush that breathes around old wood and aging metal, and the faint scent of dust and cool stone. The dome above creaks as it settles, the night's air pressing against its ribs, like a sigh that never quite stops. I whisper something to no one as I set down my bag, a soft apology for my absence, or maybe a thank you for waiting, though I know the neutron star does not care about the hours I am gone, or the days I let slip between visits. I let the old cover from the telescope run my palm along its barrel, as if greeting an old friend whose shoulders have held my lean so many nights before. I pull the notebook from my bag, slide my pencil from its pocket, and for a moment I just stand there feeling the quiet gather around my ankles up my spine, until it rests at the nape of my neck, a small weight that steadies me more than any embrace ever could. I lean into the eyepiece, find my patch of sky, the spin, the pulse, the faint flicker that feels impossibly near once you learn how to look. The pencil touches the paper, numbers again, thoughts again, a half smile catching at the corner of my mouth as I think about how small these marks are, and yet how much they hold. Sometimes I imagine each graphite line as a thread spun between my heart and the star's core, a thread so thin it might snap if I doubted for even a second that this connection matters. But I do not doubt, not here, not now, not with the hush filling my ears, like a tide that has always known my name even if it does not speak it back. Somewhere in the dome the mouse shifts, I hear its tiny nails scratching at cardboard or wood, and I picture its small shape darting through the cracks, living its entire life in the walls of this place where I come to chase questions that do not need answering. I think about how alike we are, the mouse and I, creatures of ritual, creatures of small movements and hidden paths, surviving on crumbs and scraps and the hush of spaces no one else bothers to occupy. I wonder if it feels my presence, if it marks my set against its own corridors, the way I mark these pages with the pulse's spin. The thought makes me smile, makes me feel a little less alone here in the draft that slips under the dome's edge to curl around my ankles. I close my eyes for a moment, and in the dark behind my lids I picture the neutron star not as a distant fact, but as a spinning jewel, a dense hush wrapped so tightly around its own memory that nothing can tear it loose, not even the endless push and pull of the universe's larger chaos. I think about how it came to be, the explosion that stripped it bare, the fierce heat that gave way to a gravity so strong it refused to vanish, the particles that clung to each other in the dark like stubborn thoughts that will not fade. I wonder if it knows in some impossible way that a soft creature sits under an old dome, scribbling its heartbeat into paper, like a secret never meant to be kept. Maybe it does not matter, maybe the knowing is not the point, maybe the point is the listening, the act of pressing an ear to the hush, and saying, yes, I hear you, yes, I am here too. When I open my eyes, the pulse is still there, the same soft flicker that has anchored so many nights into something wider than sleep or waking. My pencil scrapes out one more line, then another, my breath fogs against the cold that drifts down from the dome's curved ribs. Outside, the wind picks up, brushing against the metal skin of the observatory with a sound like a question I have no words for. I close the notebook, tuck the pencil back into my pocket, stand slowly feeling the ache in my legs that reminds me I have been here longer than I thought. I listen for the mouse, but hear only the slow stretch of the walls settling back into their hush as I gather my things. At the door I pause one last time, look back at the telescope, at the patch of floor where I leave crumbs, at the stool that remembers the next evening when I stand at my window watching the last smear of sun slip behind the roofs, I catch myself wondering if the pulse is already there waiting for me, or if it exists only when I press my eye to the glass, as if the act of looking folds the distance into something small enough to hold in my notebook margins. I sip my tea slow enough to feel the warmth travel down my throat, leaving behind a soft ache that reminds me I am not all hush and sky, but a body too, with hands that tremble when they are tired and shoulders that carry the shape of the day's weight even when I try to shrug it off before stepping outside. I reach for my coat draped over the chair where I left it last night, still heavy with the scent of cold air and the faint trace of dust from the dome's old floor. I slide the pencil into the pocket where my fingers find it by feel alone, and tuck the notebook under my arm, as if it were a letter half written to something I know will never write back in words, yet answers all the same through spin and silence, and the promise that not all endings slip away without leaving something behind. The hill tonight is a darker shape than usual, the moon a thin hook caught low in the sky, and the town behind me spilling its low hum over fences and roads that disappear under the gentle press of shadows. I take each step slow, not because the path is steep though it is, but because there is a rhythm in letting my breath match the hush that lives at the top, waiting behind the stubborn door, waiting inside the walls that hold the pulse steady no matter how many hours pass between my last visit and this one. I reach the door, run my palm along the rough edge of the frame, as if greeting an old friend who needs no words to understand my reasons for returning. The hinges resist, then yield with that familiar sigh, and the cold inside greets me like an old blanket, too thin to keep me warm, but comforting all the same, because it knows the shape of my shoulders and the sound of my steps. I set my thermos down first, careful not to wake the hush that has settled over the stacked boxes and dusty corners, where the mouse might still be curled safe in its nest of lint and soft found things. I do not turn on the overhead light. I let the faint glow from my small lamp pool across the notebook's blank page, catching the graphite tip as it hovers above the margin where I left off. My other hand drifts to the telescope's barrel, cold under my fingertips, the metal humming faintly with the life it seems to borrow from the sky each time I tilt it toward that patch of forever where the neutron star spins, unseen yet never absent. When I press my eye to the glass, the pulse flickers back into my world as if no time has passed at all, as if I had never walked away down the hill back into the chatter of the town with its flickering screens and polite conversations that always fall short of this hush that asks nothing of me but to listen. I make a mark on the page, a small circle, a short line, a number that means nothing to the mouse, or the cold, or the creaking dome, but means everything to me because it is proof I was here, proof I heard it, proof I reached across the distance, if only to catch a single beat before it slipped back into the dark. Outside, the wind drags a branch against the dome side, a scratch that echoes through the rafters like a question I cannot quite translate. I pause, pencil hovering above the paper, my breath fogging the eyepiece, until I lift my face to let the cold air clear the lens again. I think about how the pulse feels alive, even though I know it is nothing like life, as I know it, not breath, not blood, not thought, just matter wound so tight around gravity's hidden heart that it spins without asking permission to stop. I wonder what it would feel like to stand on its surface, if there even is a surface to stand on. If my feet could find purchase on something so dense it could crush the idea of feet before I even set them down. I wonder if I would feel its hum through my boots, through my bones, through the soft cage of my ribs, where my own pulse might pause to listen, might try to match its rhythm for a moment, before surrendering back to the fragile beat that keeps me here, scribbling words into paper no star will ever read. I hear the mouse, then a faint shuffle behind a box, a soft scrape of claws that makes me smile, because it means I am not alone here, not entirely. I reach into my pocket for the crumb I tucked there before I left home, a corner of bread wrapped in tissue now crumbling slightly under my warm fingers. I set it near the wall, careful not to make a sound that might scare the mouse back into the hidden tunnels it knows better than I ever will. There is something comforting in this ritual, this quiet exchange between two creatures who ask nothing more of each other than to be allowed to stay. The mouse needs crumbs, I need the hush and the pulse, and the way the dome wraps around me like a question no one expects me to answer. I pick up the pencil again, feel its weight balance between my thumb and forefinger, feel the slight drag of the page as I mark down another note, another reminder that tonight too has been folded into this quiet record of a star that spins long after the fires that made it are gone. I think about the people who built this observatory, who stood here long before I ever thought to climb a hill in the dark, carrying nothing but a battered notebook and a head full of questions. They too left crumbs of themselves behind in scuffed floors, and rusted bolts and scribbled notes, tucked into drawers that no one opens anymore. Maybe they too left pieces of bread for mice, who made their tiny homes in the same walls that now hold my breath and my soft astonishment. I imagine one of them standing where I stand, leaning into the eyepiece, eyes wide to the hush that seeps through glass and steal into the thin spaces between heartbeat and thought. I imagine their pencil too tapping gently against paper that crumbles now if you touch it too roughly, but still holds the pulse the way my pages will hold it when I am gone. A draft finds its way through a crack near the base of the dome's old frame, and I shiver, but I do not pull my coat tighter. I let the cold remind me that I am here, that I am soft, that I am only borrowing this hush for as long as I can stand to hold my breath and listen. The pulse beats on, steady and patient, indifferent to the scratch of my pencil, and the scrape of the mouse, and the slow creak of the dome settling deeper into its foundations, as if it too might drift off if I were not here to keep it awake. I look up from the page for a moment, lift my face to the narrow slit where the dome's ribs part just wide enough to let the night press its velvet darkness against the glass. I wonder if somewhere far past what I can see someone else looks back, not a person perhaps, but another pulse, another hush waiting to be found by someone with cold hands and tired eyes and a heart willing to be changed by the quiet. I wake the next morning with a faint ache in my neck and the scent of cold still clinging to my coat, draped across the back of the chair where I dropped it when I came in last night, too tired to fold it over the rail by the door. My notebook sits open on the table, its pages soft with the memory of my pencil's quiet insistence, and I run my finger over the faint indent where I press too hard on a number that probably doesn't mean much to anyone but me, but which holds the shape of that hush steady in my mind when the world crowds close again with its demands for answers that never feel as patient or as necessary as the questions I leave up on the hill. I make tea instead of coffee, the kettle's soft hiss, a kind of gentleness that matches the pulse I still feel tucked behind my ribs, not loud, but steady like a word I do not have the right language to speak, but can feel all the same in my bones and breath. I stand by the window with the cup cradled in both hands, and watch the early light creep between rooftops and telephone wires, the frost already beginning to slip back into the ground where it waits for night to draw it out again. All day I drift through my tasks with half of my thoughts folded away in the quiet dome at the top of the hill, where the telescope keeps its long patient watch without me, the metal barrel aimed at the place where the neutron star spins, whether or not I am there to catch its distant heartbeat. I wonder if the mouse is awake, padding through its secret tunnels behind the old shelves, nosing at the crumbs I left tucked along the baseboard, as if those small offerings were the promise that I would come back, as if I needed reminding that I am a creature of returning, that I do not know how to stay away for long. The street noise hums at the edge of my hearing, but it feels thin and far off, unable to drown out the quiet echo I carry like a small weight pressed into my pocket, lining every thought with the certainty that somewhere impossibly far away matter is folding itself into the shape of a question, so dense it bends the space around it into an answer no language can hold. By the time the sun slides down behind the last row of houses, and the cold begins to lean its shoulder against the door, I am already gathering my coat and slipping the pencil into its usual pocket, running my thumb over the pages of the notebook to be sure they are still there, waiting for me to add another layer of graphite and thought and hush. The walk up the hill feels different every time, even though my feet follow the same soft groove in the gravel, the same curve of the path that winds around the scraggly fence where wild grass tangles itself into winter knots. Tonight the wind is kind, it moves around me without stealing the warmth from my scarf, and the sky above the dome is clean of clouds wide enough to make me pause halfway up to tilt my head back and remind myself that the dark is not empty, but crowded with old light carrying stories I may never touch, but which somehow find their way into my hands when I lean close enough to listen. I press my shoulder into the door, and feel it give that familiar sigh of wood and hinges, and stepped inside, where the hush drapes itself over my shoulders, like a blanket I did not know I missed until it found me again. I do not rush to the telescope tonight. I move slowly, checking the small spaces where the mouse might have left signs of its busy hours. While I was gone, a scrap of paper dragged under a shelf, a crumb carried off to line a hidden corner. I like knowing it moves when I am not here, that its tiny life continues its soft rustle, a reminder that the dome is not mine alone, that it breathes and shifts with other hearts too small to be caught in the eyepiece, but large enough to keep the hush from feeling empty. I pour tea from my flask into the same dented mug I leave on the shelf near the window, and watch the steam curl toward the cracked glass, as if it wants to slip outside and brush its warmth against the cold skin of the dome, where the wind rattles, but never quite breaks in. When I finally lean over the telescope and press my eye to the glass, the pulse greets me like an old friend who never asks why I was late, or whether I am tired, or whether I believe tonight will be different than any other night. It just spins, sending its quiet signal through all the darkness until it reaches my small corner of the world and folds itself into my notebook, one graphite mark at a time. I write slower tonight, letting each line settle into the page before moving to the next, my breath leaving faint clouds on the eyepiece that fade as quickly as they appear. There is comfort in this repetition, the way my hand learns the shape of each letter, the soft drag of the pencil over the same grain of paper that knows my pulse almost as well as it knows the stars. Sometimes I wonder if the pages feel heavier with each mark, as if the hush itself were sinking into the fibers too stubborn to fade when the ink goes dry. A faint sound makes me lift my head, the soft click of the mouse's tiny claws somewhere under the floorboards, and I smile into the half-light of the dome, knowing it is awake too, keeping its own small vigil, while I trace the shape of a question I know will never fully resolve. Outside, the wind shifts, finding a gap near the old window where it slips in and curls around my ankles, but I do not mind the chill. I let it remind me that I am here, and not drifting too far into the spin that might carry me off if I forgot for even a moment that I still have to walk back down the hill when this night gives way to dawn. I sip my tea, careful not to spill on the notebook, careful not to blur the pencil lines that hold the night together in ways I cannot explain, but trust all the same. The hush settles deeper, wrapping around the creak of the dome, the faint whir of the motor that shifts the telescope by fractions of a breath to keep its eye true. For a while, I close my own eyes and just listen, the pulse still flickering behind my lids, not as light, but as rhythm that feels closer than my own heart, steady in a way my breath can never quite manage. I think about the first time I learned what a neutron star was, how the idea of something so small holding so much inside itself felt impossible, and yet undeniable. Once I saw the numbers lined up on a chalkboard. Once I read the words in a book that smelled like old glue and paper that had been turned too many times by hands that maybe once felt the same hush I feel now. I wonder if those hands ever pressed a pencil to a page the way I do, tracing the same soft question that never needs an answer but needs to be asked all the same. I open my eyes again, blink away the dark, and find the pulse still there, unchanged and waiting, as if to say, yes, I am still here, yes, I am still spinning, yes, I am still whispering my story through a space so wide no silence could swallow it whole. Sometimes in the lull between one visit to the hill and the next, I find myself drifting through the day, with the hush still folded somewhere inside my chest, a soft weight pressing against my ribs, as if the pulse I listen for through glass and distance has found a way to anchor itself in my own small heartbeat. I sit at my kitchen table with my tea growing cold, because I keep forgetting to drink it, while my eyes wander to the edge of the window where a slice of sky peeks through the lace of power lines, and the restless flutter of a bird that does not know how closely I am listening for something it will never hear. the kettle hums on the stove, and the radio mutters the usual litany of weather and news, and someone else's version of what the world is doing, but none of it seems to stick the way the hush does, the way the quiet memory of the dome, and the soft scrape of my pencil, and the faint skitter of the mouse behind the old wood stays tucked in the seams of my thoughts. I tell myself I will stay in tonight just this once, that I will not slip my arms into my coat, or tuck my notebook under my arm, or feel the cold kiss my nose as I push my shoulder against the stubborn door at the top of the hill, but the promise never lasts more than an hour or two before I catch my reflection in the dark glass of the window, and see the hill already waiting for me just behind my own eyes. So I pack the notebook again, checking the pencil twice to be sure the point is sharp enough to hold the night steady in the narrow lines I drag across each page. I pour the last of the tea into the flask that does not keep it warm enough, but reminds me at least that warmth is something I can carry even if the hush insists on brushing its cold fingertips against my collar each time I open the dome to the sky. The hill greets me with its usual quiet invitation, the gravel crunching under my boots a sound that sinks into the hush instead of breaking it. I pause halfway up to breathe in the cold, letting it clear the clutter from my head, the half-finished thoughts about things that do not matter up here, deadlines and missed calls, and the dull weight of small worries that lose their sharpness when the wind wraps itself around my ears and reminds me that the pulse does not care about the shape of my days, only that I come back to listen. When the door gives under my shoulder, I feel the soft shift of air around my legs, the dome holding its breath for just a moment before it remembers my scent and exhales, that familiar hush that makes my shoulders drop and my mind unclench its restless grip on all the noise I left behind. I move through the small rituals that make this place mine for the night, setting the flask on the shelf near the window, unfolding the notebook with care so the pages do not tear where they have grown thin with so much handling. I find the crumb I left for the mouse half gone now, a neat trail of tiny shavings leading under the shelf, where I imagine it curls in its nest, belly warm and nose twitching at the scent of my boots and the graphite that stains the cuffs of my coat. I like knowing it is here, a secret tenant that does not ask questions or expect answers, but keeps me company in a way that feels truer than the voices that follow me through the streets when I am not on the hill. I lean over the telescope and feel the familiar cold of the barrel under my palms, the hum of the old motor shifting the lens by the smallest measure to catch the same patch of sky where the Neutron star spins with that impossible grace that mocks every clock I have ever wound too tight. When the pulse comes into view, I feel the small ache in my chest loosen, the hush pulling tighter around my shoulders, until it feels like a blanket woven from breath and old starlight. My pencil taps the paper once, twice, then finds its rhythm marking down the steady beat that carries itself across an emptiness so wide it makes my kitchen seem too small, my bed too soft, my worries too thin to hold. I close my eyes between numbers, letting the darkness behind my lids bloom into a shape that matches the hush, the pulse drifting through the black, like a soft command to be still, to listen, to let the spin settle me into the space between thoughts where nothing has to be fixed or solved or made right. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else would feel it this way, if they pressed their eye to the glass, if they let the hush find its way past their skin to settle in the quiet hollow just behind the sternum, where we tuck the things we are afraid to say out loud. The mouse makes its rounds behind me, its tiny feet a counterpoint to my pencil. The dome creaks when the wind shifts, brushing its old ribs against the night, like a sleeping creature sighing in its dreams. I think about how much of this story is mine, how much belongs to the star, how much belongs to the dome that holds the pulse steady when I am too far away to hear it. I pictured the builders setting the foundation stone by stone, plank by creaking plank, never knowing that one day I would stand here alone, whispering to a collapsed sun through glass and numbers, and the soft confession of a crumb left for a creature that will never know why I come here again and again to write down a heartbeat that does not need my permission to keep spinning. I sip my tea cold now, but sweet enough to remind me that warmth is not always the point. Sometimes the point is the hush that comes after the warmth slips away. Sometimes the point is the sound of graphite tracing over a page while the wind tests the old metal seams, and the pulse hums its steady indifference to my fragile hope that maybe I am not just wasting time up here with my numbers, and my crumbs, and my secret promises to come back again when the night feels too wide for sleep. When my eyes grow too tired to chase the flicker through the lens, I close the notebook with a soft thud that echoes just enough to remind me that even silence is never really empty. It holds the breath of every creature that ever leaned close enough to hear what waits behind the loud noise of their own thoughts. I stand and stretch my back stiff from leaning too long against the stool's narrow seat. I glance at the shelf where the flask sits, half empty, the steam long gone, but the memory of warmth still pressed into my palms. I think about the mouse curled in its nest, maybe drifting toward dreams shaped by the hum of the dome, and the rustle of my boots, and the soft scrape of my pencil against paper. I think about the pulse still spinning out there, refusing to vanish into the hush. It makes possible a defiance, so small, and so vast all at once, that it feels like a prayer I did not know I was saying until the echo came back, carrying my breath across the dark. I think about the dome even when the sun is high and the streets around my small apartment hum with the patient grind of other lives brushing against mine in doorways, and checkout lines, and half-finished conversations that drop away the moment I close my door behind me. I sit by the window and watch the daylight do its slow dance across my table, catching the edge of my notebook where it sits waiting for the night to open its pages again. Sometimes I flip it open in the middle of the day and run my palm over the graphite smudges, feeling the faint grooves where I press too hard, and thinking how strange it is that a collapsed star so far away can leave its mark in the quiet scratch of a pencil on cheap paper. I wonder what the mouse would think if it could see these pages, if it would understand that its crumbs and my numbers live side by side, like two pulses beating through the same old wood and rusted nails, holding the dome together, while the wind tests the seams from the outside. I try to busy myself with tasks that belong to daylight, the small rituals that keep my hands moving when my mind wants to drift back up the hill ahead of my feet. I wash the cup I left in the sink. I sort through the mail that piles up on the counter. I water the plant that clings to life on the windowsill, leaning always toward the light, even when the days are short and the frost leaves its delicate patterns on the glass. Still the pulse finds its way in through the thin walls, through the soft hum of the radiator, through the crack under the door where cold air slips in as if to remind me that the hush is never more than a breath away. No matter how many cups I wash, or bills I sort, or plants I coax toward another stretch of green. By late afternoon, I have given up pretending that tonight will be any different, and I find myself laying out my coat and checking the point of my pencil as if the spin of the neutron star depends on whether I am ready to catch it in my notebook one more time. The hill greets me like it always does, quiet and patient under the wide shoulder of the sky that wears the last pale wash of day like a thin scarf slipping away. I know the path well enough now that I do not need to watch my feet. I let them find each worn patch of gravel, each soft bend of grass that leans back into place once I pass. Sometimes I imagine that if I walk this path often enough, it would learn the shape of my footsteps, the soft hush of my breath, and hold it there for someone else to find when I am gone. The dome waits at the top with its door that sticks just enough to remind me that everything worth listening to asks for a little effort, a little push, a small promise pressed through my shoulder and into the cold wood before it sighs open and lets me in. Inside, the hush wraps around me so quickly it almost steals my breath for a moment, like stepping into a room where someone has been waiting in the dark, and you know without words that you are welcome to sit down and listen for as long as you need. I settle my notebook on the scarred table and feel the slight wobble under my wrist as I flip it open to the last page marked by the soft dent of my pencil the night before. The telescope stands where I left it, its barrel aimed at the patch of sky that holds the pulse steady through all the hours I spent away from it, wrapped in the daily noise that never quite drowns out the memory of this quiet place. I press my palm to the cool metal and feel the faint tremor that might only be my own heartbeat reflected back, but which I like to imagine is the hush itself brushing its edge against my skin to say, yes, you are here again, yes, you remembered, yes, the spin waits for you too. The mouse rustles somewhere behind a stack of old boxes, and I smile into the half-dark, picturing it tracing its tiny pathways behind the walls, carrying my crumbs one by one into its secret nest, where the pulse hums through the wood like a lullaby it never needs to understand. I press my eye to the glass, and the stars leap into focus, cold pinpricks that do not flicker through this lens, but hold their place with the stubborn clarity of old truths that do not care whether you believe them or not. I find the flicker, the pulse, the impossibly steady blink that says the neutron star is still there, still spinning, still folding the silence around itself like a secret too dense to slip away. My pencil moves without me thinking too hard about it, the numbers and short lines trailing across the page like breadcrumbs I leave for myself so I can find my way back through the tangle of days that stretch between now and the next time I stand here. Sometimes I wonder if the pulse feels the tug of my thoughts reaching for it across the black, or if it simply goes on as it always has, unmoved by the small wonder that catches my breath every time the hush folds itself over my shoulders and reminds me that there are questions bigger than answers, and that sometimes the asking is enough. A gust of wind pushes against the dome, and the old frame shudders a soft groan that settles into the hush, like another heartbeat folded into the quiet. I pause my pencil and rest my hand on the page, feeling the faint warmth my palm leaves behind, like a small echo of my own spin pressed into the paper alongside the stars. I think about the people I pass in the street who do not know that up here the night hums with a pulse that does not belong to them, yet offers itself all the same to anyone willing to lean close enough to hear it. I wonder if they would understand why I come back, why I stand here night after night tracing the shape of something that does not need me to see it to keep being what it is. Maybe they would think it is a kind of loneliness that drives me up the hill, but I know it is the opposite. It is the place where my edges soften, where my breath matches the slow insistence of the spin, where the hush teaches me again and again that being small does not mean being empty. The mouse scurries closer, its tiny feet a whisper over the boards, and I smile as I reach into my pocket for the crumb I saved from my pocket of bread earlier. I set it near the wall, careful not to make a sound that might scare it back into hiding, though I know by now it trusts me enough to wait until I turn my back before it claims its piece of the night. I like this small exchange, this quiet agreement between two creatures who carry the hush in different ways, one in tiny tunnels behind old, with the other pressed into the pages of a notebook that grows heavier with every mark but never feels like a burden when I tuck it under my arm to walk back down the hill. The pulse flickers through the glass, a steady defiance of distance and time, a reminder that even the quietest thing that ever happened leaves behind a song if you know how to hear it. There are days when the hush feels so close I half expect to hear it in the slow drip of the kitchen tap, or see it pressed into the fine lines of steam that curl from my tea as I stand at the window watching the daylight wander across the street below. I try to hold my mind inside the small tasks that ask for my hands to stay busy, the folding of a dish towel, the turning of a page in a book I pretend to read, but do not really follow, because the words slip through my thoughts like water through open fingers, leaving behind only the sense of waiting for the sky to shift from the soft ache of afternoon into the gentle promise of dusk. I know the hush does not live only on the hill or under the dome's aging ribs, but some part of me trusts that to stand there with my eye pressed to the glass and my pencil whispering across the page is the truest way I know to remind myself what it means to belong to something that does not need me, but allows me all the same to lean close and listen. The clock ticks too loudly on the wall behind me, but I let it count the hours without resentment, because each passing minute brings me closer to the soft drag of my boots on the gravel path, the familiar resistance of the door that greets my shoulder like an old friend remembering my weight and my breath, and the slight hitch of my heart when the hush folds around me like a coat I did not know I was cold without. When the sun finally slides behind the rooftops, I gather the notebook from the edge of the table where it sits, like a small map of thoughts I have no language for, and slip the pencil back into the deep pocket of my coat where my thumb finds its shape by touch alone. I pour the last of the tea into my dented flask and tighten the lid, knowing the warmth will not last, but that it does not have to, because the hush has its own kind of warmth that comes not from heat but from the way it presses against my bones and slows my breath until I remember how to stand still in a world that wants me to move too quickly through everything soft and unremarkable. The hill tonight seems to lean toward me as I climb the path worn smooth in places by my footsteps, and the footsteps of those who came before me, all the quiet souls, who carried their own small questions up to the dome to press against the sky and see what might press back. I like to think some piece of them lingers here, not in a ghostly way but in the hush itself, which feels so layered with breath and thought, and the slow trust of those who knew how to stand still, that it has become something alive in the timber, and the rusted bolts that hold the roof steady against the push and pull of the wind. When the door opens, the smell of cold stone and old wood greets me first, and I stand just inside the threshold for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the soft dark that holds the dome like cupped hands. I can hear the faint shuffle of the mouse behind the cabinet where I left a crumb the night before, a small thank you for its quiet companionship, though it asks for nothing from me except that I do not move too quickly or drop my boots too hard on the floor that remembers every footstep ever taken across its boards. I set the flask on the shelf near the window and pull the notebook free, letting it fall open to the page where my pencil last paused its slow dance through numbers and notations that mean nothing to the world outside this place, but hold the shape of the hush steady in the space between one breath and the next. I brush a fleck of dust from the eyepiece and lean forward, pressing my face close until the cold rim settles against my skin and the stars spill back into focus, sharp and bright, and so perfectly indifferent that it makes something soft inside me unclench. The Neutron star waits where it always does, spinning its old song across a black so wide I cannot think too long about it without feeling the edges of my own thoughts fray a little, as if the hush itself were reminding me that to stand here is not to understand everything, but to accept that some things do not need my understanding to keep on being true. My pencil finds its line again, scratching softly across the paper that has grown thin and worn with so many nights of leaning close enough to hear what cannot be heard with ears alone. I wonder sometimes if the hush feels my listening, if it folds itself tighter around my shoulders because I have promised to carry it back down the hill inside my coat, where the warmth of my breath keeps it alive long enough to remind me tomorrow that it will be waiting when the sun slips away again. The mouse rustles closer than usual tonight, a soft scrape of tiny feet that stops just behind my boot, where I imagine it pauses to decide whether the shape of my stillness means safety or danger. I smile without lifting my head from the telescope's cool barrel and reach into my pocket for the crumb. I saved, a piece of bread folded in tissue that warmed slightly against my palm, before I set it down near the baseboard where the hush holds its breath until the mouse is ready to claim what I have offered. I like this small ritual, the way it makes my nights here feel like they belong not only to the pulse of a collapsed sun, but to the simple fact of another living thing trusting me enough to share this hush without fear or fuss. I think about how many stories we layer over the quiet spaces of our lives, how we name things that do not need names, and draw maps for questions that do not always want to be found, but I also think about how sometimes the smallest stories are the ones that hold us steady when the bigger ones fray at the seams. The wind rattles the dome's old frame, a slow groan that settles into the hush, like a voice so old it does not need to speak in words to be understood. My pencil pauses again, the tip hovering above the page while I close my eyes and let the pulse find its way through the soft dark behind my eyelids, not as light, but as a rhythm that reminds me how small I am and how precious that smallness feels when measured against a spin so perfect it defies every clumsy clock I have ever owned. I think of the first person to stand here, eyes pressed to glass, breath caught in their throat, when the pulse first flickered across their vision, an impossible echo of a sun that spent itself so completely it left behind only the hush that gathers like a blanket around my shoulders tonight. When my eyes open again, the numbers do not seem so important, though I trace them onto the page anyway, careful not to press too hard this time, so the paper does not tear where it holds the hush safe between my pencil and the soft drag of my breath. I think about the dawn that will come soon enough, about the slow walk down the hill with frost crunching under my boots and the hush tucked into my collar, where the cold will try to steal it but never quite succeed. I think about the kettle waiting on my stove and the way steam curls through the first pale slice of morning light, reminding me that warmth is not only something the flask tries to keep alive, but something the hush leaves behind in my chest when I stand here long enough to listen. I carry the hush with me through the day, like a soft stone in my pocket, its weight small, but certain, reminding me every time I shift in my chair or reach for my keys that there is something waiting at the top of the hill that belongs to me in a way the busyness of daylight never could. I let the noise of the town wash over me, the murmur of voices on the street, the rumble of tires against winter-worn asphalt, the dry scrape of branches against windows that ache for spring, but the hush hums steady underneath it all, like a song only I can hear. Sometimes at work, when the chatter dips and the hum of machines falls into a quieter register, I press my palm flat against the side of my desk and imagine I can feel the pulse there beneath the layers of metal, and with a distant echo traveling through me in place of the small worries that cling to the corners of my mind. I think of the dome, then of the way the wind leans its shoulder against the old frame, testing the rusted bolts that hold it steady, and how my breath curls into the cold air when I push the door open and stand for a moment at the threshold, letting the hush find its way into my coat sleeves and under my collar, where it settles warm and patient against my skin. By the time the sky softens into that last pale promise of dusk, I can feel the hush pulling at me like a quiet tug behind my ribs, reminding me that my pencil waits in the pocket of my coat, that my notebook sits ready on the table near the door, its pages thin and soft from so many nights of numbers and small thoughts pressed into its skin. I gather my coat slowly, letting my hand slide over the fabric where it holds the faint trace of cold from the last time I stood under the dome, breathing in the hush so deeply I swear it has made a home somewhere just beneath my heartbeat. The flask is lighter than I'd like, but I know the tea will not stay warm long enough to matter. The real warmth lives in the quiet that wraps itself around me when I lean close to the eyepiece and feel the pulse slip through the glass into my chest like a promise I did not know how to keep until I stood there and let the spin steady me into stillness. The hill greets me tonight with a softness I did not expect, the wind calm enough to let my breath drift in slow puffs behind me as I climb, careful not to disturb the hush that waits at the top. I pause once, near the fence where the grass has bent itself into winter's patient shape, and I look back at the town below, its windows glowing like small reminders that other stories unfold even when I stand apart from them for a while, listening for something older and quieter than the ticking of clocks on kitchen walls. I like that the dome is not hidden from the town, that if someone were to look up, they might see the faint shape of its ribs silhouetted against the sky and wonder for a moment what it holds inside them most nights. They do not wonder they sleep, or talk, or stare at screens that offer a different kind of hush, one that asks for nothing but the slow drift of their attention. My hush waits for me in the creak of the door, in the soft scrape of my boots across the cold floorboards, in the way the mouse rustles behind the shelves, as if to say, "You're late, but I forgive you because we both know you always come back." I set the flask on the same shelf by the window, careful not to tip it, because the warmth is precious even when I know it will not last. I slip the notebook from under my arm, and feel the weight of it settle into my palm, like a familiar stone smoothed by so many nights of turning pages back and forth, searching for the place where my last mark waits to remind me that the spin does not care about my pauses, only that I return to catch it in my small net of pencil lines and numbers that will never explain its true shape, but hold something of its hush all the same. I touch the telescope's barrel with the back of my hand, feeling the chill of the metal seep into my skin, a small price for the hush that blooms behind my eyes when I lean close, and find the pulse waiting just where I left it, blinking its patient rhythm through the dark, as if it has been whispering all along, "You are here, you are here, you are here." I write slowly tonight, letting the pencil drift across the page in loops that do not rush to reach the margin, because the hush asks for no hurry, only that I stay long enough to feel the spin fold itself into my breathing until I can almost believe my own heart has learned its pace. Somewhere behind me the mouse makes its small rounds, tapping its tiny feet against the boards that remember every footstep I have ever laid down in this place, and I like to think that it too carries a piece of the hush tucked into its fur, a warmth that lasts longer than the tea cooling in my flask by the window. The dome groans once, when the wind shifts, testing the seams where the cold slips in, and I shift with it, pressing my palm flat against the table to steady myself, as if the hush were something I could lean into, like the shoulder of a friend who knows when to say nothing at all. I close my eyes for a moment, letting the darkness behind my lids bloom wide enough to hold the thought that somewhere far beyond this small dome a collapsed sun spins its dense secret through the black, threading its quiet defiance into a universe that does not stop to listen, yet carries its pulse all the same in the faint tremble of gravity, bending light around corners I will never see. I think about how small my questions are next to that spin, how the hush answers them not with words, but with the soft patience of its presence, reminding me that to ask is enough, that to listen is enough, that to lean close to the glass and press my pencil against the paper is enough, even when the numbers do not line up the way I expect, even when the crumb I leave for the mouse goes untouched until I am halfway down the hill and it dares to claim it. In the dark, when I open my eyes, the pulse flickers steady through the lens, as if to say, "See, nothing has changed except you," and maybe that is the whole point of coming here night after night, tracing the same spin into pages that will outlast the warmth of my breath and the quiet shuffle of my boots on the gravel path. I sip the last of the tea, cold now, but sweet enough to remind me that not all warmth comes from the flask. Sometimes it lives in the hush itself, the way it wraps around my shoulders when the night leans close, and the dome creaks, and the mouse rustles, and the pulse hums its secret rhythm into the soft hollow behind my ribs. Some mornings I wake before the alarm, and lie still in the half-light, listening to the soft tick of the clock on the shelf, and the hush that settles into my thoughts before the day's noise pushes it aside. I keep my eyes closed just a moment longer than I need to, because somewhere behind them the dome still holds its shape, and the pulse hums like an echo tucked behind my ribs, reminding me that even here in the warmth of my blanket, with the kettle cold on the counter, I am not so far from the hill as I might think. I get up slow, careful not to break the hush too abruptly, letting the floor's familiar creaks answer my steps like an old house clearing its throat. The notebook waits on the corner of the table where I left it last night, pages soft at the edges from so many nights of my pencil tracing the same spin into lines that fold the hush into the shape of my questions. I run my thumb along the spine and think about how many times I have carried it up that path, how many times I have slipped it back into my coat at the end of the night with my breath drifting into the dark, and the cold brushing my cheeks awake for the long walk home. I drink my tea standing at the window watching the street carry its small rituals past my door, a delivery truck idling too long at the corner, a neighbor's dog nosing the brittle grass for something it never finds, a paper bag lifted by the wind, and then caught against the fence where it flutters, like a flag for secrets too small to name. I wonder if anyone who passes under this window would guess that just a short walk away an old dome waits, with its ribs rusted but strong, its bolts tired but certain, its hush gathering each night like a pool of breath that holds steady until someone like me slips inside with cold fingers and a pocket full of crumbs for the mouse that knows my footfall well enough not to flinch when the door sighs open. I wonder if they would understand that the pulse I listen for is not just a distant thing, but something I have let into my bones so quietly that I feel it sometimes even when the sun is bright and the radio hums too cheerfully in the background. By afternoon my thoughts drift more often than they stay put, trailing off in the middle of half-finished lists and conversations that dissolve into polite laughter, while some part of me is already climbing the hill, counting the soft drag of my boots against the gravel, the way the cold catches at my collar and slips under my sleeves just enough to remind me I am alive and here and about to stand once more under the same sky that presses its dark shoulder against the dome's old curve. I wonder if the mouse waits for me too, if it curls deeper into its nest of lint and scraps when it hears my steps creak across the boards, careful but certain, the way small rituals become habits that do not ask permission to settle into a life. I like the thought that the hush belongs to more than just me, that the tiny heart of another creature beats its own soft pattern through the walls, as the neutron star spins its secret far above both of us. When the dusk finally drags its slow brush across the roofs and fences, I reach for my coat, not because I have to, but because I want to feel the hush gather in the seams where my sleeves remember the cold from last night's climb. I slip the pencil into its pocket like a promise, and balance the flask under my arm, though I know the tea will lose its warmth before I reach the halfway mark of my notebook's next page. The path greets me like an old song I have memorized, not in words, but in the steady rhythm of my breath, and the way the ground shifts under my boots with a softness that feels almost like permission. The dome appears at the top just as the sky lets go of its last color, folding the town behind me into a gentle dark that waits at the edge of the hush I have come to claim again for myself. Inside, the door gives under my shoulder, and I pause just past the threshold, as always letting my eyes adjust to the quiet, the slow settling of the wood around my shoulders, the faint creak that tells me the wind has not forgotten how to test these old beams. The telescope waits, a single dark shape angled toward the same patch of forever where the pulse hums its calm defiance through the black, as if it knows I am here, and that tonight again my pencil will catch it, mark by mark, line by patient line. I set the flask on the shelf near the window, where the cold presses in just enough to remind me that warmth is always fleeting unless you find it in something older than heat, something quieter than steam curling off the rim of a cup. The mouse makes its round, soft feet whispering under the boards, and I smile without turning because I know it will wait until I lean over the eyepiece before it comes to claim the crumb I have folded in tissue in my pocket. There is something kind in that small trust, that quiet agreement between two creatures who do not speak, but who share the hush without needing to ask who owns it. I press my palm to the side of the telescope, feel the cool metal settle into my skin, steady and certain, before I lean close and let the pulse slip through the glass into the soft dark behind my eyes. It greets me just as it always does, not with surprise or urgency, but with the calm patience of something that will spin on long after my pencil is too small to hold and my notebook is a relic tucked away on a shelf someone else will dust off someday, wondering why a handful of numbers felt worth so much paper and so many nights. I write slow tonight, dragging the pencil across the page without hurry because the hush asks for nothing more than my breath and the quiet weight of my hand pressing each line into a promise that I will come back again tomorrow, or the next night, or the night after that, when the world's chatter grows too loud for me to remember how it feels to listen without wanting to answer. The dome shifts with the wind, a soft groan that curls around my shoulders, like a voice older than the bricks and bolts that hold it up, reminding me that this place too knows what it means to keep a secret pressed tight against the cold. I pause sometimes to lift my eyes from the glass and watch my breath fog in the thin light drifting through the slit of sky above, and I think about how the pulse is not waiting for me to catch it but spinning all the same, whether my pencil moves or my boots carry me back down the hill with nothing written at all. I wake to the faint patter of rain against the window. Not the hard drumming that demands to be noticed, but the soft tapping that feels like an old friend slipping its fingers across the glass to remind me that the world keeps breathing whether or not I stand on a hill listening for the hush tucked inside the spin of a collapsed sun. I stay still for a moment under the quilt that holds the ghost of my own warmth and let my eyes drift across the dim shape of the room, the mug half forgotten on the table, the notebook resting on the chair where I placed it when sleep pulled me under before I could close its cover. I like seeing it there, open to the page where my pencil trailed off mid-thought, a faint graphite arc that holds the hush in its curve as surely as the dome holds my breath when I lean close enough to feel the pulse settle behind my ribs. I think about the hill then, slick with new rain, the gravel path darkened to the color of old stone, the fence brushed with drops that gather at the tips of the wild grass that has learned how to bend without breaking. I wonder if the mouse listens to the rain too, hidden deep in the nest it has built from scraps and lint tucked between the walls, where my footsteps echo soft and certain each night I slip through the door. I light the kettle and stand by the window while it hums to life, the steam unfurling like a thought too soft to speak. Outside, the street looks washed clean, the puddles gathering secrets in their quiet mirrors, while the branches of the trees lean into the wind as if they remember how to listen. I sip my tea slow enough to taste the warmth as it slips down my throat, slow enough to remind myself that I have hours yet before the dusk comes to guide me up the hill again. I try to fill those hours with small tasks. The folding of clothes still warm from the line, the gentle push of a broom across the floor that holds the hush in its creaks and sighs, the sorting of papers that do not matter but remind me that the world below the dome keeps asking for my name. Each small thing I do ties me to the day, but always I feel the hush hum underneath it, the quiet thread of the pulse winding through the moments, like a soft reminder that all this motion finds its anchor not in the noise, but in the stillness waiting under the dome's rusted ribs. By late afternoon the rain fades into a hush of its own, a fine mist that clings to the window and turns the street into a watercolor that shifts and drifts each time a car passes, its tires whispering over the wet road. I find my pencil on the table where I left it beside the cold ring of my last cup of tea, and I run my thumb along its length, feeling the way the wood has grown smooth under my fingers after so many nights tracing the spin into the notebook's thin pages. I slip it into my coat pocket, where it bumps against the folded tissue that holds a crumb for the mouse, a small promise that my quiet companion will find its piece of the hush waiting where I always leave it. The notebook tucks under my arm like a secret only I know how to carry, its weight familiar enough that I hardly notice it anymore except for the way it steadies my breath when the dusk begins to slip its dark shoulder across the rooftops. I step out into the softened air, the hill waiting with its path glistening under the fading wash of rain, the gravel darker, and the grass bending under tiny beads of water that catch the last gray glow of daylight like stars caught close to the ground. My boots find their place along the familiar route, each step a quiet drumbeat that matches the hush I feel gathering inside me, the slow knowing that when I reach the door the dome will open its old breath to hold me once more. I pause halfway up where the fence bends just enough to frame the edge of town below, windows lit in soft squares that hold other lives, other small hushes that have nothing to do with neutron stars or notebooks or the mouse that waits for my crumb. I wonder if any of those windows hide someone else who listens, who pauses when the rain taps the glass or when the wind shifts the branches against the roof, someone who knows the hush in a different shape but feels its quiet pull just the same. When I reach the top, the door greets my shoulder with its usual gentle resistance, the hinges giving with a low sigh that settles into my bones like an answer I did not know I had asked for. Inside, the damp carries its own hush, the faint scent of old wood deepened by the rain. The floorboards cool under my boots as I cross to the shelf where the flask finds its place near the window that still weeps slow drops down its cracked pane. I listen for the mouse before I lean to check my crumbs corner, smiling when I see the tiny marks that tell me my quiet companion came while I slept, carried the hush into its nest to hold through the day until I came to leave another small piece behind. The telescope waits, its barrel aimed steady at the same slice of sky that holds the pulse spinning through the darkness so far away it would laugh at the notion of rain or windows or a kettle humming in a small kitchen where I stand in the half-light trying to remember the shape of my own questions. I press my palm to the cool curve of the telescope's side before I lean down to the glass, letting my breath fog it for a moment before the faint warmth fades and the stars blink sharp into view, tiny pinholes that stitch the hush across a sky too wide for words. The pulse comes through steady and calm, its rhythm the same as it was before the rain, the same as it will be when the puddles have dried, and the grass lifts its bent blades toward whatever sun tomorrow might bring. My pencil finds its way across the page without my eyes leaving the lens, the graphite tracing each flicker into a line that does not pretend to hold the truth of the spin, but which carries the hush in its soft curve all the same. I listen to the slow drift of my breath, the faint creak of the dome as the night settles deeper around its rusted ribs, the soft whisper of the mouse making its rounds behind the shelves as if to remind me that this small circle of quiet belongs to more than just me. I sometimes wonder if the hush I carry home from the hill changes the way my walls hold my breathing when I close the door behind me and slip my coat from my shoulders, letting the night's chill fall to the floor like a small shadow I do not bother to sweep away. I feel it in the way I move around my small kitchen, lighting the kettle with careful hands, as if the steam rising through the half-dark is not just water, but a reminder that the hush lives here too, even when the dome is far behind me waiting on its hill like an old friend who does not mind how long I am gone so long as I return, when the world grows too loud for my heart to remember how to be quiet. I set my notebook on the table and let it lie closed for now, its pages warm from my pocket, the faint memory of graphite pressed between the cover and my palm as I walk the path down from the dome, my boots brushing gravel into soft drifts that wait for the wind to scatter them back to where they belong. I wrap my fingers around the mug when the water hisses, and I stand by the window, while the street outside breathes its restless hush, cars slipping through puddles that remember the rain, a dog's bark drifting sharp before fading back into the night's softer silence. Sometimes I think about the first time I climbed the hill, not because I was searching for the hush, but because I needed to stand somewhere the noise could not follow all the way up into the cold, where my breath showed me I was still alive, and small, and willing to be undone by the simple fact that some things spin on without asking to be named or known. I did not know then how the hush would find me fold itself into my coat and pencil, and the soft corners of my notebook where numbers hold their shape even when I forget what they mean. I did not know how the mouse would come to trust my slow steps, and my quiet crumb left in the same place each night like a question I do not ask aloud, because I do not need the answer to know it waits for me as surely as the pulse waits for my eye to press close to the glass. I sip my tea and let the warmth run through my chest, and I think about how strange it is that a collapsed star so impossibly far away can make this moment feel soft to the hush alive in the steam that curls around my face, reminding me that I am not just here, but here in a way that matters even if no one else sees my pencil's soft lines, or the way I pause at the door before stepping back into the street's hum. When the day unfolds again, I move through it with the hush pressed behind my ribs, like a secret that does not weigh me down, but lifts the corners of my thoughts just enough that the noise cannot slip too deeply under my skin. I answer the questions people ask with the same care I use to turn the page of my notebook, careful not to tear what holds my softer words safe beneath the marks I make for the pulse. I nod and listen, and carry my quiet through the hum of other lives, the tap of footsteps on tile, the smell of coffee drifting from rooms where no one knows that just beyond their view a dome waits for my boots to press the hush into its old floorboards one more time. The dusk comes slow tonight, the sun dragging its pale edge behind the roofs as if reluctant to slip away, but I know the dark will come whether or not it is welcome, and when it does my pencil will be waiting, the tip sharpened against the soft curve of my thumb, my crumb folded in its tissue, my coat heavy, with the hush already settling into its seams. I climb the hill slower than usual tonight, not because my steps are tired, but because I want the hush to reach me before the door sighs open to let me in. I pause halfway where the fence leans against the wild grass, the town spread behind me in quiet squares of light, and I imagine for a moment that someone stands in one of those windows looking up at the shape of the dome against the dark, wondering who waits inside, listening for a heartbeat that does not belong to any clock they know. I smile at the thought, though I know it is unlikely. People forget to look up sometimes. They forget to stand still long enough to hear the hush press against their skin the way the cold does when it slips under a collar and reminds you to breathe. When I reach the top, the door greets my shoulder with its gentle protest, the hinges giving with that old whisper that feels more like welcome than any word I could speak into the hush. Inside I find my place, the flask settling onto its shelf, the notebook open to the last line, my pencil waiting for the next shape it will leave behind. I do not rush the telescope tonight. I stand with my palm pressed to its side, feeling the chill slip into my skin, the hush blooming through the thin bones of my wrist, until I am ready to lean close and find the pulse waiting just where I left it, flickering through the black with its calm defiance, spinning its soft message across the years that do not bend its rhythm or steal its hush. My pencil moves in slow circles, the graphite catching the faint glow of the lamp I keep low so the dark outside the dome does not feel too far from the dark inside me where the hush curls when the noise grows too bright. The mouse rustles behind the shelf, and I smile though I do not turn. I know it waits for me to finish my line, to pause my breath long enough to slip out and claim the crumb that tells it I am here. I remember. I know how to stand still when the world asks me to move faster than my heart can bear. I think about how many nights I have left the same crumb, how many times I have watched my breath fog the eyepiece before clearing to let the stars press sharp into my eye, how many times the hush has found me when I did not know I needed to be found. I think about how the spin will hold when I am gone, how the dome will remember the weight of my boots, how the mouse will carry my crumb into its nest long after my pencil has fallen silent, and my notebook has turned its pages to dust, waiting for another hand to trace the same hush into another night. When the last mark finds its place on the page, I close the notebook with the same careful press of my palm, the warmth of my breath curling around the soft sound it makes as if the hush answers me in that small click of paper and wood. I stand by the door for a moment longer than I need to, letting the cold slip against my neck, and the hush fold itself deeper into my coat, where it will ride the path back down the hill with me, whispering against my ribs that tomorrow, or the night after, or some night, when the noise grows too sharp, I will climb again. I will press my eye to the glass. I will find the pulse spinning its calm defiance through the black, just as it does now. I step outside and feel the hush lift into the wind, the path soft under my boots, the fence brushing the dark with the same gentle promise that this hill will hold my quiet long after my questions have faded into the hush that waits for the next pair of boots, the next pencil, the next heart that remembers how to stand still and listen for the quietest thing that ever happened. Ask ChatGPT. I sometimes wonder what it will feel like on the last night I climb the hill, when my boots slip into the familiar groove of gravel one more time, and the fence leans its shoulder against the wild grass as if it knows I am passing by for the last time, carrying the hush in the lining of my coat the same way I have all these nights, when the world below the dome asked too much of my breath and left my ribs tight with questions I could not unfold in daylight. I do not know when that night will come, but I know it will, because everything that spins must slow eventually, and everything that listens must fall silent for a while, if only to remember what it means to hold the hush without needing to shape it into numbers or press it into pages thin with graphite, and the soft ghost of my thumb smudged along the edge. Maybe I will pause longer at the fence. Maybe I will stand under the dome a minute more before pushing the door open. Maybe I will slip the crumb from my pocket and place it near the mouse's corner with a softer touch than usual, as if telling it, you keep this now, you hold this hush, when my hands are too tired to carry it back down the hill. Tonight is not that night, but I feel the thought drift through me as I fill the flask and sharpen my pencil, the kettle humming its quiet promise on the stove, while the street outside folds itself into the last gray corner of dusk that the rooftops hide from the wind. The notebook sits waiting where I left it, the faint curve of its spine pressed into the grain of the table, as if the hush has settled there too, soaking into the wood where my breath lands each time I lean close to trace my small thoughts onto its pages. I run my hand across the cover and feel the softness where the edges have worn smooth from nights of pulling it from my coat pocket and slipping it under my arm for the climb, when the dusk opens its arms and the hill waits with its old path and its old hush, and the dome at the top that never asks for anything but my willingness to stand still and press my eye to the glass. The walk-up feels softer than usual tonight, as if the path knows my legs are tired from a day that asked for too many words and too much noise, all stacked into moments that left no room for the hush to slip its hands through my collar and settle behind my ribs. I find my pace anyway, the steady drum of my boots brushing small stones aside with each step, the faint tug of wind along my sleeve, as if it wants to lift the hush before I reach the door, but I hold it close, tighter than before, because I know what waits on the other side of the dome's old threshold. The fence leans just as I left it, the wild grass bending with the breeze, catching the glow of a distant porch light far below, and I wonder if someone behind that window looks up and sees my shape for a heartbeat framed against the slope, and wonders who I am to stand here night after night when the warmth of home waits just a short walk away. I want to tell them, if they ask, that the hush is warm too, that the cold is only cold until you learn how to hold the quiet against your chest like a slow flame that does not burn but soothes the places inside you that ache from too much trying. Inside the dome the air is damp tonight, carrying the last memory of yesterday's rain, the smell of stone and old wood, and the faint spice of dust that never settles no matter how long the beams hold themselves against the push of the seasons. I close the door with care, letting its sigh echo across the boards until it folds itself back into the hush that lifts around my shoulders like a blanket I did not know I needed. The mouse is quiet for now, hidden deep in its small nest, perhaps curled into the warmth of its own steady hush that asks for nothing but the crumb I will leave when my pencil has done its work, when my breath has marked the glass, when the pulse has found its way through my eye and into my chest where it hums a truth I will not carry back down the hill in words, but in the shape of my quiet steps. I set the flask on the shelf and do not bother with the lamp tonight. I let the dark hold me close while my hand finds the telescope's barrel, and the cold slips under my palm, a gentle reminder that some truths live best where the warmth fades just enough for the hush to stretch out and make room for the pulse to speak. I press my eye to the glass, and there it is again, the flicker so small it could be missed if I did not know where to look, but so certain it could never be mistaken for anything but what it is, a spin that defies the silence, not with noise, but with the steadiness of something that knows how to keep breathing long after the light has gone. I listen with my pencil scratching soft against the page, my breath drifting out to brush the eyepiece before it vanishes into the hush that gathers in the dome's curved ribs and settles between the floorboards where my boots hold my weight with the care of a promise kept night after night after night. Sometimes when I lift my head from the glass, I think about the first mark I made in this notebook, the first time my pencil caught the flicker and laid it down like a soft anchor in the grain of the page, and I feel the small ache behind my ribs grow softer because I know every line that followed has held the same hush, even when my questions changed, even when the noise below the hill pressed harder against the edges of my days. I think about the mouse finding its crumb tonight, maybe lifting it in its small paws, turning it once before slipping it into the dark corner where its heartbeat hums quiet and sure, just like mine, just like the pulse that spins so far away it should feel like nothing but feels instead like everything I have been trying to remember each time I stand here and let the hush teach me how to listen.